Alan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, we've got a special treat for you today. We didn't want to bring this ruse up right off the bat, but we've got a gentleman joining us who you're close friends with. His name is Nassim Taleb, and he's coming on to hash out some differences. He says he's got a bone to pick with you. Wait, hold on. First of all, he wants to summarily just hurl insults and then hang up and leave. So I don't know how you want to deal with this.
We're becoming all ears because I mean that would be the first time I've actually ever had direct contact with him. He refuses to acknowledge that I exist, which is I mean that I'm sure that comes across as kind of I don't know obnoxious or
assumes that nobody else exists but himself.
But he I don't know if you know this or if your audience knows this. He will like devote a decent portion of his life to trying to destroy people he genuinely doesn't like. So, like he goes massively out his way to attack people. So I actually think it's kind of a privilege that he's never done that to me because he absolutely knows who I am. Or, well, he knows what I did at least. He maybe doesn't know my name. He is aware of it, but he's never said anything about it. And I think it's so that he doesn't, like, I think he's aware of the dynamics given how much more, you know, famous and popular he is than me, that he doesn't want to Streisand it, right? He doesn't want to draw attention to it where it wouldn't have been drawn otherwise. So I'm in this like weirdly unique position where he just refuses to acknowledge I exist. So if you do actually get him on the line, that'd be hilarious.
We'd love to. Well, next time you come on, he's going to be on here with us, and we're just going to let you guys just beat the shit out of each other.
BCB's becoming the cesspool for controversy and argumentation. We have Foss and Carlasare coming on next week to duke out their bond differences. You and Taleb, we just become that would be amazing. The MMA of Bitcoin, if you will, to quote Bitcoin as Venice.
We don't have anything to debate other than whether or not he's full of shit. Like this is a funny thing about not just that ridiculously long, it's not even an essay, it's like a book at this point. I should probably publish it as a book. But not just about that, but like what is even said within that is, you know, the very first part. And the reason it's called what it is that I actually think his books are really good. I recommend them. Like they're very entertaining.
Read a few of them
as well. They're great. Mm-hmm. We don't really disagree about actual facts, well, other than Bitcoin, I guess, right? We quite strongly disagree about that. We disagree about how much of an asshole he is. That is my issue. Like that's it. I don't know if you even have that argument.
He's a 4th degree black belt asshole, I'd say, especially after he attacked Lynn Alden last year the way he did. Like, fuck that guy. Yeah. We've got a near and dear place in our heart for Lynn, and when we see people attack Lynn, we want to beat the shit out of them.
You cross Lynn Alden, you're dead to us, Alan.
Yeah, I actually have a funny story about this, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of this. I may be the only person who's aware of this because I track this stuff so closely. But right after this happened, like maybe days after this happened, Lynn Alden went on what Bitcoin did with Peter McCormack, and Peter McCormack referenced. I don't think it was even the Taleb one. He referenced something else that I had written, and asked Lynn Alden, and like didn't cut this from the interview. Asked Lynn Alden if she knew who I was, and she's like, "No,
no idea."
Yeah. And Peter's like, "Oh," but he asked it in like, we should really find the recording of this because he asked it in a way that he was sure she was going to say yes, and then they'd have a talk about the thing that he was referencing.
Yeah,
she's just like,
that's the moment you knew you haven't made it. Yeah, it dawned on you. It hit deep.
I've since met her. I mean, we chat. I don't actually even remember how. It must have been quite a long time ago because we now follow each other. We've chatted a few times. I met her in real life, and I think it's going to become a thing that I just remind her of this because that was the first thing I said to her. I was like, "Do you remember this happening?" Because I remember this. I was wounded by this.
Yeah, it hasn't let go of you.
Yeah, she's the kingmaker in Bitcoin, Lynn Alden,
for sure.
Oh, she's amazing.
We hear you said something before we click record about us interrupting a Bulgarian TV show. You don't really. It sounds like you don't really feel like being here. You'd rather be watching this Bulgarian TV show. Clue us in on what we interrupted here.
To be fair, right? Like I pulled myself away, and also I know I can go and watch it like after the fact. It's sort of we have this like TiVo recording thingy on the Bulgarian TV package that we have.
Dude, they're years ahead of us, Dan.
So I will watch it. As soon as we're done here. Oh yeah, it's amazing. It's
we'll expedite this.
I don't even know how to direct people to find it because it's got. I mean, the name is Bulgarian. It's called Evening of Olyata, and I can't even write it. Maybe I'll tweet it. I don't know, but it's in Cyrillic. But it's basically like it's similar to Survivor. I think they've obviously based it on that, but it's like Survivor on crack. It's Survivor to the nth degree. It's just amazing. It's like everything about Survivor is just made hilariously more complicated for no reason. And kind of the shtick with it, which I don't even know if this is intended to be funny or not, but I find it hilarious, is that the games just never end. The games will go on for an hour and a half, and it's basically if you took like 5 Survivor games and stitched them together, and like when you finish one, you then go on to the next one, and then you finish that one, you go on to the next one, and it goes across like 3-4 commercial breaks in the middle of the one game, and you like forget what even happened an hour ago. Oh, it's amazing.
So you're going to be watching this till like the middle of the night, because it's 9 something your time.
Yeah,
Let's say
yeah,
we
for
go
sure.
for an hour, a couple more drinks, then the show till 3 or 4, and there you go.
I highly recommend if your audience has any way of finding this, they absolutely should. And like I intend to as well. So I'm leaving here in a couple of days. I'm going to the US for a week, and then I'm going back to where I live in the UK. I'm streaming this. Like I need to keep up. I'm invested now. I have my favorite. Like,
what's the name of the show again?
It's called Igri na Volyata. It translates as Games of Will.
All right. The people actually pass, like people die. I'm imagining like a cross between Saw and Survivor, where people lose appendages.
That's not bad, actually. Yeah, Well, so every now and then, it's interesting you bring this up, because the games are like weirdly dangerous, and most of the time it's okay because the players are just like quite cautious about it, because they don't want to die or break a leg or whatever. But every now and then something actually quite serious will happen, and they stop the game, and like medics come on. But they show all of that too. It's like really immersive, but because you like care about the characters so much, well, they're not characters exactly. The contestants, they are real people, right? Because you care about them so much. Like, oh shit, what's his face got hurt? Like, guys, come and look at this. See if he's going to be okay. See if he can finish the game. That's the funniest part. They always finish the game. Like the reason that they show you this and that they pause it is so they can like put a bandage on his head or whatever, so he can then finish the game.
Wow.
Slow slip into basically just full-blown gladiatorial games. This is the beginning of it.
Love it. Run the circus, folks.
Alan, tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself to our audience, as you are a first-time guest here.
You might need to guide me a bit, because there's like lots of different ways I can do that. I mean, I'm Alan. I am a Bitcoiner, I guess. Scottish. I'm half Scottish and half American. And I've spent most of my life in Scotland, but going to the US a lot to see family. Went to school here, obviously not here, I'm in Bulgaria now. Went to school there. Went to college there, got a job straight out of college in finance in Edinburgh. I've lived there ever since, but basically we probably will want to go into this in a little bit, so I'll be concise now, but the entire time in my career in investment management, I was kind of shifting it slowly, bit by bit, towards being more about Bitcoin from a starting point of nothing at all. And to be completely honest, from a starting point, when I graduated and first took the job in 2015, I didn't really know that much anyway. I was kind of, I had bought some at that point, but it was very early on in my journey, so I wouldn't really have had much to contribute anyway. But then by the time I left, I guess this is maybe the most interesting thing now, is that in March I left to start a Bitcoin business. So I became so thoroughly orange pilled, not just personally, but professionally as well, that I'm now doing it full time.
So 2015 roundabouts is when you started getting really interested, buying some Bitcoin.
It was a very slow, like I've talked about this before. I don't really have a very interesting like origin story. There was no, light bulb moment or eureka moment or anything. It took a really long time. It was just a very slow burn. I think I actually got into Bitcoin when I was still a student. So that it would have been, I don't even remember exactly the starting date or anything. It would have been either 2013 or 2014. What I like to say is quite fun looking back on it, given that it like seems to have worked out reasonably well, that I didn't buy any at the time because I was very, very poor as a student. I had not only did I have no money, I had a large amount of negative money. When I got a job, like a real job, I fixed that, bought some Bitcoin, which is actually super important. Like I shouldn't make too much light of that, because I'm sure you guys are familiar. I'm sure most of your audience is familiar that you do need to own it to really start to get it. Like it's not something you can process entirely intellectually. You can have it explained to you as much as you want or as is available, but until you actually own it, until you go through a cycle, you don't really know. And so I'd say it was probably more like 2018 2018 or 2019 when I really started to get into it, which was actually linked to work as well. And there is a more involved backstory here I can go into if you want. But that was also related to why I got on Twitter in the first place. I've had Twitter for what's probably a surprisingly short time for like people who are in Bitcoin or who are like fairly prominent in Bitcoin. I only got it in, I believe it was February or March of 2019, but it was specifically because like I got Twitter for Bitcoin basically, like
specifically to fuck with Taleb.
I just decided
was the original.
not to.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was going to say you
Taleb
originally
didn't
got
like
it just
Bitcoin.
to fuck with Taleb, and then you got into Bitcoin.
No, I liked him then actually. I for a decent amount of my Twitter career, I was like, buddying up to him as all his, army of sycophants do. That little did I know. Eventually, that was like 2 years later. That was, or was it? No, it was 1 year later. I finally snapped on him. But no, I liked him for a long time. I think everybody liked him for a long time, as far as I know. I don't think anyone's like. It takes a while to like fully grasp why you need to be Taleb pilled,
Yeah. I like your statement a second ago about you need to own it to understand it.
Oh,
and I might go
yeah.
even one step further and say you need to custody it, move it, and have an understanding for what you've just done. Right.
That's true.
For a lot
That's
of
true.
first world Westerners moving Bitcoin, they're like, well, it looks like Venmo. When you actually digest what that means, where it can be done, and how novel it is for humanity.
No,
that's when
I
it really
love that you
starts
said
to
that.
click.
And like I remember, so it's funny. I said before I don't really remember when I first encountered Bitcoin, but I so clearly remember when I first had that experience, exactly the experience you described. Because like I said, slow burn, wasn't as into it as I probably should have been. I mean, probably everybody feels that way, but I think I first would have bought some in either 2015 or 2016. But was just a lazy noob, right? It was all on Coinbase. I didn't really think about it. I was DCAing, which was kind of nice. I'm glad I found out about that. But I remember when I first started to learn more about exactly the kind of things you're talking about, not just custody, but sort of everything that goes along with the, the responsibility of owning it and securing it properly. Taking it off the exchange, but then also it's just kind of a weird personal circumstance that like made this experience, I think, hit home even more. That I was in, so I've lived in Edinburgh in the UK for a long time, but I was in the US at the time for work. I think it was unrelated, actually. I don't think it even had anything to do with Bitcoin. I just happened to be in the US when I first sent myself at that point, non-custodied Bitcoin, which like really made it feel, because, it was sort of, I guess in like literal terms, it was kind of meaningless, but in terms of where I was, it felt like, I've just sent this across the world. I know it's to me, but still, it's like the infrastructure that made this happen is like thousands of miles away. And the amount I've sent was significant. And now it's like literally on my phone. This is important.
And nobody's in control.
Yeah.
It's a complete mind fuck when you first experience this. It really is. It's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
Everybody
this should have that. Like
for sure.
It really is. It's I don't want to be too kind of, I don't know, almost religious about it. Or maybe some people do experience this religiously. I don't know, but it's a profound experience. Like if you've never encountered anything like that before, and it's I think it helps if it is like a significant sum as well, right? You're not just like pissing about with lightning or something. It's like,
that's what I was just going to say. Lightning brings another layer to that. And when you see it happen, not only across the world, but instantly to your friend across the ocean somewhere in Europe, like it's completely insane. Really cool to see.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is Venice is that your Medium articles where we both sort of first encountered your ideas. Amazing article.
Thanks very much.
A book. Both are fantastic. Yep. Let's start from the top with that. When did that idea originate for you? What did and does Venice embody? And then how does it relate to how you see Bitcoin? Huge question, but for people listening that haven't read it and don't know what that means, what does that mean to say that Bitcoin is Venice?
Well, okay, yeah, that's kind of a fun
Summarize the book in 3 minutes and then we'll move on.
Just say buy the book and we'll move on to the next question.
2 sentences or something like that. So yeah, Bitcoin is Venice. I can get out of the way quite quickly and then get into the more meaningful stuff, I guess. The title is in reference to what I thought were some quite not really serious but cute and interesting comparisons between Bitcoin and more medieval Venice, but for the sake of it being like nice rhetoric, just Bitcoin is medieval Venice, or early Renaissance Venice would have made more sense, I guess. But yeah, just to give an idea of what some of these are. So the idea that both are very, very easy to defend, and hence very, very hard to attack. And that I think directly lends itself to being a kind of a foundation for the flourishing of not just commerce, I guess, but kind of novel commercial institutions. That this sort of enforced peace and voluntarism, and I guess kind of entangled as well with the idea that they are commercial hubs. It's not just a political point, it's an economic point as well. In the case of Venice, was enormously important to contributing to the start of the Renaissance. Like that's where it tends to be more associated with Florence, but the century or two of surplus wealth creation that actually then created the time basically for people to afford to hire pursuits is arguably more dependent on Venice than it was in Florence. And then hopefully, obviously, what I'm going for with the analogy is that Bitcoin will allow something similar. Even there's other stuff as well. Like there's the fact that the political system in early Renaissance Venice was like bizarrely, almost comically complicated in a way that made it very difficult to change things, and like no one really understood exactly how you would go about changing something unless basically everybody agreed that it ought to be changed. That's obviously kind of a fun comparison to Bitcoin as well. So yeah, there's stuff like that. But I'd go a step further, that in terms of the article maybe being a bit too kind of clever for its own good, or at least the idea of it, that the point of picking that as like a nice metaphor for how to think about Bitcoin, but like a completely non-serious one, obviously. I'm not claiming that it's it's not like a definition in any helpful way. It's just kind of a romantic idea, but was to then introduce a whole bunch of other equally non-serious romantic ideas about just sort of fun ways to think about Bitcoin. So the way that article is structured, just if the audience hasn't read it, is that every subsection is claiming Bitcoin is something else, and then kind of diving into what that metaphor was. So I should know this off the top of my head. I think it was Bitcoin is Ariadne. The idea there being so Ariadne is the Greek, I don't think a goddess, I think a demi-goddess, if I remember correctly, but who laid the thread for Theseus to escape the labyrinth rather than have to fight the Minotaur. And so the idea is it's the thread that lets you escape. You don't need to fight. You can just leave. Then what was the next one? Bitcoin is gravity. That's easier to explain. That's just that it sucks all value into its orbit. Bitcoin is, what was the next one? Bitcoin is halal. Which I've since explained a bit more. We might want to get into that later on. But explaining its seemingly fortuitous, kind of coincidental connection to Islamic economics. What came after that? Bitcoin is logos, so it's speech. I think that's kind of well understood now. Bitcoin is techne, so it just works. I think I chat on Taleb there too. I think he gets a mention. It's like he's one of these people who just nitpicks some perceived flaw in it, but like it doesn't care that it actually works. Like that's probably the most interesting thing about it. And then Bitcoin is Venice. So that was kind of the idea with what the name is. I've caused a lot of trouble for myself by calling that, 'cause I need to explain this all the time. Like, this doesn't really mean anything. Like, don't worry about it. It's more just to get you to think about how interestingly new this is.
Yeah, it also flows really well too. Just thinking about like I think I liked when I hear that name. It makes me think about humanity reaching from medieval times into the Renaissance, and like everything getting better from there. Exactly. So for that reason, it's just good in itself.
in the book, your co-author was Sasha, right?
Yes.
Who wrote the MMA section?
Oh, that's all Sasha. Yeah. And
Okay.
I'm really glad that he did that, because there's kind of an involved backstory there, in that weirdly, well, if you've read the book, weirdly, if you haven't, this won't mean anything, but weirdly, that was like, as a kernel of an idea, that had probably gestated for like by far the longest. He'd been talking about this for like 5 years, something like that. But I guess a much simpler version of it. So just the idea that MMA is a great metaphor for capitalism. And for about 3 years, I've been telling him to write this down. Right. And he just never did it. But we kept teasing it out in conversation. We kept like finding new directions you could pull this in. And basically the fact of writing the book was like the excuse for him to finally write it down. But no, but it's all him. He's very into MMA. I've actually more than once now on like a podcast interview been asked about this, but where he's also there, and I'm just like, I don't know, but Sasha, you like, I don't really fight. That's your thing.
A lot of good sections of the book. This section's awesome. We had to bring it up. Shout out to Frank and Jay, two guys we work with that do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But what they haven't read it yet, but they're going to need to. Sweet. It basically to summarize the section for those that haven't read it, it's basically that there's tons of it, and I'm going to butcher this for people that actually study these disciplines. So I apologize, but there's
write it, so I can't help. Sorry.
Tons of different fighting disciplines that didn't really collide until the 20th century. And when they did, we learned out quick that some of them were total hollow bullshit, and some of them actually worked based on who was kicking whose ass. And mixed martial arts was kind of an arena, an environment for the sharpening of actual praxis to play out. And if I remember the section right, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu holds up insanely well. Basically,
I think so. Yeah, I think the idea is Sasha will end up correcting me for this offline, I'm sure, but that if you're on your feet, Thai kickboxing is the best. Like, we just know that now because of MMA. But when you get on the ground, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best.
Yeah,
but yeah, like, you're right. Nobody knew that because it had never been tested before.
It's just wild to me that after reading that, I didn't know that. You just assume that fighting styles have, come in contact with each other over the years, but apparently not. It's just nuts that really hasn't happened until within 30 to 40 years.
Yeah.
If I understand Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right, it's basically take people to the ground ASAP. So basically what's happening right now is Bitcoin's taking fiat to the ground, and we're going to see who's got the best ground game. We have these one of these gentlemen we mentioned, Jay, who's constantly in the gym doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, has been there's been some bouts with Jim, another buddy of ours, much larger, on paper, much stronger. I think Jay's progressing. Josh, could we say that Jim is fiat and Jay is Bitcoin, and we're going to find out who prevails?
That's a pretty aggressive stance to take. I think I'll forego that, but we will video the fight and we'll put it on our website for everyone to enjoy. Whoever
Jim
wins.
is not fiat, by the way. Jim gets butthurt every time we bring this up. Jim's a great guy, ardent Bitcoiner.
If he dies,
one of the best guys I know.
He dies.
But that is basically the premise, and this comes through back to the Venice thing. If you could just elaborate on this idea of Bitcoin works. Why does it work despite it being sort of counterintuitive? And then how does it maybe foster an environment where it's going to be allowed to be in competition that forms of money haven't undergone yet?
Yeah. I mean, well, this is exactly why I was so pleased. I don't want to say I tricked Sasha exactly, but I eventually convinced him to actually write this down, because I'm probably not the one to say this, but I would like to think that we then sort of we worked that idea into the rest of the book about as much as we could, I think, because I was just really excited by like actually having it down. And that's why we put it first as well, because I think it's a really important principle that you can't and it also, I should say as well, before I even say what it is, that this definitely goes well beyond MMA. It's just that MMA is a very accessible explanation of this far deeper principle. I think that definitely, it applies to economics. It gives you insights into Bitcoin, but that there are many, many areas of what would you even call it? Human action, I guess, if you want to be really pretentious. I don't know, social affairs, something like that. Any social situation with more than one person where, you know, they're interacting, right? Where you simply can't know what is going to happen until you do it. You can't work it out on paper, which also importantly means, I wouldn't say you can't exactly, but it's probably inadvisable to design it before it's happened, right? To tell everybody how something will work and tell them to, you know, behave according to whatever you've come up with, and thinking that that will lead to the best outcome, basically, because there's some element of uncertainty, there's some element of probably human decision making, I think is a more important point. That's a nice connection, I guess, between MMA and economics, everything else we talk about, you know, culture even, that human decision making is inherently unpredictable. And especially when, I think the really nice thing about MMA, the way this, one of the reasons this works really, really well is that it's not just one person unpredictably making decisions. It's two, but I think more importantly, more than one, right? That's actually maybe the thing that's worth highlighting more, because it forces them to react to one another. And then the dynamics, if you want to call it that, just get so complex that you can't possibly model it. Let's say, if you want to return to that kind of way of thinking about designing some kind of system top down. And MMA works really well to describe this, because I think it's just intuitively obvious to anyone. I don't think you really need to like be that in, like, I'm not that into MMA, for example, but if you've had like any experience whatsoever with probably just sport, or like if you've ever been in a fight, I don't know, like you just can't predict well, I mean, you can say like, oh, I think that guy's going to win, but there's no way you can say what is going to happen, you know, in what order, in the way that you could with anything that's remotely scientific.
It's the old Mike Tyson quote: "Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face." Right?
That's an endo. I forget where. It's probably in chapter 1. I'm pretty sure it's, you know, we
probably is. Yeah,
we cite him as I think we call him a noted risk theorist. We say as noted risk theorist Mike Tyson aptly
a noted risk theorist
get punched in the face. Yeah, so I just love that works so well, because I think it's a nice contrast to the way, and I mean, I don't mean to be like insulting to anyone else who's kind of tried to explain this, including myself, because I've been in this position too, but explaining the same thing in the realm of economics is maybe even the simplest one, but, you know, we then take it upon ourselves to try and apply this to kind of various aspects of culture as well. I think that's far less intuitive. And I think just for like the average person, for like, you know, the layman who maybe doesn't even know anything about Bitcoin, the idea of top-down design may be far more appealing to them there. And they don't, it's not as immediately obvious why it's nonsensical. Whereas in MMA, it just completely is. I just love it. I'm so glad we
evolutionary.
I'm so glad that's what we started with.
Evolutionary is a good word, Josh. I like that word.
I think that's exactly, I mean, reading that MMA chapter, that's kind of like what jiu-jitsu was. It was just evolution of people fighting each other, kicking each other's asses, and eventually figuring out which method was best over and over and over. You know, it was a procreation of MMA throughout the years. Yeah,
which is a really important concept. I mean, I wish unlike with all the different sections of Bitcoin is Venice, I actually don't have all of this memorized, unfortunately, but there's like a list of contrasts, I guess, like different sort of attitudes that you can apply to this stuff that we planted in chapter 1 in the MMA chapter, and then we refer back to a lot. And yeah, experimentation versus design is a really important one. And then evolution, I forget what we contrasted with, but the idea of evolution is extremely important. It's maybe more obvious in MMA, because it's like, you know, if you don't, if something proves to be superior and you're coming up against it, you need to adapt, or you just will lose. But it's a very apt and healthy way to think about what ought to happen in economics.
For sure. Right. I don't want to beat this to death, but that's where I was going to go with this next idea, which is
well done.
Yeah, exactly. Aikido, which was that Japanese art that nobody had ever, you know, it was basically this, you know, nobody gets to choose, or any other fighting style that they have to fight this method against each other. It reminds me a lot of this Keynesian economic system that we have for the last 50 to 80 years, where these ideas are, you know, basically a religious idea where we just follow them rigidly. We don't deviate. Yeah. We don't allow this to compete against other ideas. There are no other ideas in university. This is the only way economics works. And, there are alternatives, Austrian school and a few others, but they just simply don't get taught. So Keynesianism doesn't get to fight a battle. It just fights itself over and over.
Right.
And there's no improvement. And that's just yeah, go ahead, Dan.
A comment and then a question on the back of it, because I think for someone that hasn't read it, they could be like, what the fuck are you guys talking about here? How's this like MMA? There's two things that need to happen for a fighting style or an economic system or a form of money to work. First of all, it needs to be allowed to fight. So that was kind of a lot of the MMA idea, is a culture through MMA allowed fighting styles to collide. You could say, in a sense, because Bitcoin's built on the internet and it's decentralized, global, and open source, that's the mat, so to speak, that allows the fight to ensue, right? Is its ability to be, as we call it on this show, a slippery hog and proliferate on the low ground, right, wherever. But then number two, it needs to kick ass. It needs a place to fight, and then it needs to kick ass. Why, put yourself back in the old gig, some dude, some institutional investor, peer of yours comes up, thinks Bitcoin's a total clown show. Where would you go first in explaining why you think Bitcoin is going to kick ass? Why it's going to take that bullshit fighting style to the floor and get the tap?
I'm not sure that I don't think there's a simple answer to that, but I don't mean to be like copping out from answering the question, but I think what this comes to, at least for me, and I'm kind of thinking back on, my experiences of trying to convince people of this, is that it is an incredibly complicated topic, right? Like it touches on, it's remarkable how many different disciplines it touches on. And so I don't think there is an answer kind of completely in general, because I think it would depend on, what their particular misunderstanding was. I think that's kind of the annoying flip side of it, right? That because it is so interdisciplinary, because it touches on, and to some extent requires, mastery of exactly, but considerable knowledge of many, many different disciplines, there are that many bad reasons that people can find to dislike it. And so I think you just have to identify whichever one it is. I mean, I could probably come up with like 5, maybe 10 right now that are all totally distinct from one another.
Yeah.
Right.
But are like perfectly plausible reasons somebody could dislike it on first contact.
Right. And you also need to know the person you're talking to, because whatever is their, interest du jour, there's probably an angle to explain it to them, using the anecdote that goes along with whatever they're interested in.
What was most compelling for you at first, out of your curiosity?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, this is like part of the whole, it was quite a slow burn. My story is all that interesting. But I'm really, or was really, really lucky in the background that I had at the time when I first encountered it. And like, I'm not sort of downplaying this or joking about this in the slightest. Like I could very easily, like this could very easily have just passed me by, and, I found out about it 5-10 years later, whatever. So there was a couple of things. So at the time, so I mentioned before, right, I was a student when I first encountered it. I was an undergrad, and I was studying math and philosophy, and both of them are very, very useful to basically, I mean, the way I like to describe this, I'm not at all meaning to give the impression that like I just got it immediately, because there's this, I always like to cite, I think we put it in it's either in chapter 1, it might even be in the introduction of Bitcoin to Venice, the Jameson Lopp article, nobody understands Bitcoin, and that's okay, right? So I adhere to that quite strongly. I don't understand it, that's okay. So I'm not meaning to say I understood it right away, but it was really important that I didn't dismiss it right away, which I think is the far, far more common reaction. So studying math, studying philosophy, both very helpful. I also had been running a business, which actually was terrible. Like I didn't make any money from this, but it was more it's like the experience that counts, right? It's like it was good on my CV rather than for actually, profiting or getting any kind of return from it. But yeah, so I've been running a business, and then also it's kind of adjacent to that, because it's kind of behavioral, kind of academic. I was reasonably well versed in Austrian economics as well. And then the final thing too is that the only kind of semi-serious job I'd ever had. So, I mentioned before, it's kind of stitching all of this together. Still a student at the time, so I hadn't graduated, taken on an actual full-time job. Done a bunch of jobs while I was in uni that were just like minimum wage, like flipping burgers and that kind of thing. But the only sort of serious one I'd had was as a software engineer. And so again, that was very, very high. So I had all of this, right? And I feel like it was just sort of just above the threshold to be like, oh, maybe this isn't stupid. Maybe I should be humble here and like actually look into this a bit more.
Yeah.
I'm going to reach back. I promise this is the last time we're going to talk about fighting. We'll move on from here.
But
But this is just too easy. So you allude to the fact in Bitcoin is Venice that Bitcoin could fail. So can you ruminate a bit on like what is a scenario where Bitcoin is just getting its ass kicked in, choked out on the mat? What are some scenarios where you think that's a even slight likelihood? And just fill us in on what your opinion is on that.
So I honestly, I don't think I have any original thoughts on this. I do. There are a couple of ideas I find interesting, but I'm just saying that to make sure
we'll make sure Taleb's aware that you got no original ideas on this.
Well, on a lot of things, I don't know. There's a lot of references in that book. No, there's two that I think I find the most compelling, and so they're due to Joe Kelly and Ben Hunt, who I think most of Bitcoin Twitter
I like what Ben Hunt has to say quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I'll be familiar with them. I mean, I like both of them. I get on with both of them as well. I've talked to them about these.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too much into Joe Kelly's because he has written extensively about it, and I'll end up just like having to pull up the article and just like read the whole thing. But I think hopefully he would approve of me summarizing it this way, that I think in the very long run there is enough uncertainty about Bitcoin's ongoing security to be worth worrying about. Where I disagree with him is that, and I think he presents it a little bit too rhetorically for my liking. I mean, he's doing that to get people to read it in the first place, so that's fine. But I think he sees it as definitely an issue. Like, there's no way this is avoidable. This is going to be a disaster. Whereas my view is more like, it actually, to be honest, kind of ties in with some of the themes of Bitcoin in Venice, Bitcoin is Venice, that he might be right, but it's basically unknowable. Like, we won't know for another 30 years, 50. I don't even know how long it'll be.
Can you enumerate on that a little bit?
What's his primary concern?
Is it the amount of hash power he's concerned about, or is it more of the cryptography? How solid it is?
It's the same as it's just like a more kind of dramatized version of the way Peter Todd articulates it as well. The fact of the declining subsidy means that it will just become exponentially easier to attack. And he obviously acknowledges that, okay, well, what if the price goes up? And like, I think Paul Stortz has written on this quite eloquently as well, that it really only makes sense to think of it in dollar terms, at least until energy itself is priced natively in Bitcoin.
Right. That,
you even if you acknowledge for appreciation as money, it will eventually be fully monetized. For sure. But the subsidy will keep coming down. So you can't escape this forever. Like, you can't monetize your way out of it.
Right.
I think that's his argument. And then, but he goes into much, much more detail, which I don't think is really worth it now, about exactly how dangerous this is and how it might be exploited, in particular by a state actor for whom cost is not really an issue. So that's kind of roughly his outline. And I agree that this is worth worrying about. Where I disagree with him is that I think he thinks this will happen. Like, there will come a point where something needs to be done about this. My attitude is, we're so early with this. We have absolutely no idea how people are going to use it. And hence, I could, for example, say something like, it'll be fine because it'll all be Lightning opens and closes. But even that, I think, is kind of misrepresenting the deeper uncertainty of my, right, how I think it is intellectually honest to think about it, because I don't even know if that's what's going to happen. Like, maybe there's some other scaling mechanism, or maybe we end up using Lightning in a way that doesn't require that much activity. Maybe there's something, actually, maybe it's kind of both, where it's like, there's some other way of scaling that prices out Lightning. Like, I just don't know.
Yeah.
But I know enough about why I don't know to think that you don't need to be as fatalistic as Joe is about this. Like, we can probably not think about this for 30 more years and that will be fine. Like, we should focus on innovating such that we fill up the blocks right?
It's
like
it's like everything else in Bitcoin.
Stop worrying about empty blocks.
Agreed. And it's like everything else in Bitcoin. It's a 0 or 1 event. Like there is either this is going to work or it isn't. And, it seems to have been, and I think Satoshi maybe understood early on that this is either going to work or it simply isn't. So I'm going to engineer this, to the best of my ability. But there's no way. I mean, it's hard to think that Satoshi could have thought that far ahead, that like this would be a problem 40 years from now. Or I guess be so multidisciplinary that he would have predicted so many of these problems. There's got to be a few things that, maybe just slipped.
I mean, even that's like, I think a bit too certain. Like that implies it is a problem. Like, I'm not sure it's a problem.
No, I'm not saying it is, but it certainly could be. But if it totally monetizes, it seems like it would make sense that the value would be so high that it would still be able to secure itself. Which is why I'm saying it's either a fully fail or fully work situation. There's no middle ground.
It makes me think of a section in Bitcoin is Venice where basically, Alan, you say size matters. In that, like, if you
I remember saying that.
it should have been a full chapter. Maybe I'll
point that page out to us.
Maybe I'll write another Bitcoin Magazine article, Josh, titled "Size Matters."
My wife's not reading that.
Basically, the idea here is, though, and tell me if you guys disagree. I don't think you will.
I don't
size,
agree. Size doesn't matter.
Value, liquidity, usership, development on the network. If they're in a steady, perpetual decline and they, taper off into obscurity, Bitcoin's incredibly vulnerable. Like the bigger Bitcoin gets, the more secure it gets in a lot of ways. And so, we're expecting volatility. We're going to have downs, catastrophic downs, ups, all that. But if we zoom out on, let's say, a 10, 20-year time horizon and involvement and value accrual of the network is on a perpetual decline, it's going to be less secure. It's going to be less robust. It's going to be less usable. It's going to have less liquidity. This is just a fact. I know there's a lot of Bitcoiners that are like, I don't care if it goes to $400 and stays there forever. I'm all good. It's like, well, Bitcoin's not as strong if it does that. It's a sign that it's not working.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And actually, I think that feeds quite nicely into Joe's argument too, that in one of the, I think he has 3 different posts on this, if I remember correctly. And in one of them, he does actually go into the mechanics of how, he probably just says China, to be honest, but like a state actor could attack this. And I don't actually remember if he says this or if this is just something that we've chatted about, but part of the problem is definitely, describe it as something like, I don't know, notoriety almost, that this was okay when nobody knew what it was, right? And there's even the sort of somewhat legendary Satoshi post about this in Bitcoin Talk when they're discussing getting WikiLeaks on Bitcoin. Do you guys remember this?
I've read about this. I wasn't around back then.
So
but
obviously me neither. But when WikiLeaks got kicked off, like PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, blah blah blah. There was a chat in Bitcoin Talk about okay, should we onboard them, which wasn't really a thing. There's no merchant processing or anything, but should we reach out and get them to do this? And Satoshi, I don't remember it verbatim, but Satoshi's response was basically like, no, this is a terrible idea because we don't need, it's 2 years old or something at this point.
Yeah, we don't want the heat.
Attention. So with that in mind, I think there is an element of that at play, which now I'm thinking about it. I don't mean to keep referencing Taleb annoyingly, but he has a lot of good sayings, right? So it's almost like anti-Lindy in a weird way that the longer it goes on, the more vulnerable it gets for this specific reason. I mean, obviously for other reasons, you would argue it gets stronger and stronger, and it's like anti-fragile, blah, 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 to use another annoying Talebism. But in the sense that it's probably now got to a point where at least everybody knows where it is. I guess maybe there is a further stage of not only do they know what it is, but they take it seriously. Maybe there's a leap there that we haven't actually made yet.
Yeah.
But I think that ties in with your point, Dan, about how at certain stages of its natural adversaries knowing enough about it, it does actually become unacceptable for the price to go too low. And more is for the security to go too low, but the only good gauge of that is for the price to go too low.
Size matters.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our show sponsors. The BCB podcast is sponsored by Capital Logistics. Capital Logistics is a freight broker connecting truck drivers and shipping partners around North America. A true blue-collar business that supports blue-collar Bitcoin. They specialize in temperature-controlled cargo, efficiently hauling food, supplies, and other freight nationwide for some of America's largest companies. Capital Logistics is a firm believer that people and businesses should be able to save what they earn without having their purchasing power manipulated by the financial system, ravaged by inflation and currency debasement. As early adopters of innovative systems throughout their business, Capital's excess cash flow is put into Bitcoin every month. If you're someone that wants to work with a company that shares blue-collar values and an affinity for Bitcoin, reach out to Capital Logistics today. Find them online at capitallogisticsllc.com. That's capitallogisticsllc.com.
What if you didn't have to pay healthcare premiums anymore? What if you could invest in Bitcoin instead? With Crowd Health, you can put aside money for health expenses in your own account and even hold a large part of it in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up, you get the upside. Not big insurance companies. Pay one low monthly total to fund your account that is yours. Choose your doctors and hold up to 75% of the funds in Bitcoin. If a large expense comes up, Crowd Health will crowdfund the bill for you to pay quickly. Stop supporting the broken health insurance system with your hard-earned capital. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code BLUE now and experience freedom from health insurance by utilizing Bitcoin. Right now, you can get your first 6 months for just $99 per month. That's a fraction of high-deductible insurance plans. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code BLUE to sign up. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code BLUE. Crowd Health is not insurance. It's a totally different way of paying for healthcare. Terms and conditions apply.
BCB podcast is sponsored by Ledden. Ledden is a very unique financial services company with a highly principled, Bitcoin forward perspective. They are the first ever digital asset lending platform to undergo a formal proof of reserves attestation, where an independent public accountant regularly confirms that the company is properly accounting for client assets. Simply put, this company mirrors and embraces the transparency, accountability, and auditability of the Bitcoin protocol and network itself. If you've listened to BCB, you certainly noticed that we advise our listeners to be careful, manage risk, and never get over-leveraged. And that does include ensuring that any borrowing and lending decisions make sound mathematical sense based on your lifestyle and specific situation. Where available in your jurisdiction, Ledden offers a menu of powerful financial services. Keep ownership of your Bitcoin and access dollar loans with Ledden Bitcoin-backed loans. Harness your Bitcoin holdings to buy a new property or finance the home you already own with the upcoming Ledden Bitcoin mortgage product. Save Bitcoin and USDC to have access to Ledden dollar loans and their trading service if available. You can look into Ledden's well-architected menu of services at ledden.io, that's LEDN.io, and visit start.ledden.io/blue-collar-Bitcoin and sign up to get $10 USDC for creating and funding an account.
Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by arguably the most legendary company in Bitcoin, CoinKite. Established block 141,000, CoinKite is an industry leader in security and signing devices. They are also the producers of the renowned Cold Card, the world's most trusted and secure Bitcoin signing device. Built with a plethora of features fit for Bitcoin beginners all the way up to the most advanced users. This device is a one-stop shop for your Bitcoin custody needs. CoinKite also manufactures the Block Clock, a gorgeous e-ink digital art piece sitting in the background of every serious Bitcoiner on planet Earth. Block Clock can be programmed to scroll through key Bitcoin metrics including price, hash rate, next halving date, and much more. They are also the makers of the Open Dime, a small USB stick that allows you to spend Bitcoin like a dollar bill. Pass it along multiple times. Check out CoinKite's whole suite of products, including the Sats card, tap signer, seed plate, and that honey badger hat you know you've always wanted at coinkite.com. Use promo code BCB for 5% off select purchases, including the Cold Card, at coinkite.com.
Now back to the show.
Size matters, yeah.
And price matters.
Yeah. You, along this vein, you talk about Bitcoin being gravitational. We like to talk about Bitcoin becoming engorged. Why? That's going to be part 2 of my article series, Bitcoin engorgement.
So
Bitcoin is, and then some vaguely sexual.
Yeah, it's a asexual organ.
Bitcoin
predator.
is size.
It's an
Bitcoin
asexual
is
predator. That's we find our episode. We find our
Asexual
episode
predator.
title.
There it is.
There it is.
I like it.
Asexual
Go for it.
I think it's
predator.
good.
So speaking of size and it
Speaking of
accruing,
engorgement,
why is it gravitational? Why do you think it's going to suck in tons of value, tons of use cases? Big part of your article. Start us from ground zero there.
Sure. So I think this is actually more pointing to a kind of a flaw in not even just fiat money, but the way that the investment universe has responded to the incentives, I guess, that are pushed upon it by fiat money. It's not really so much about fiat itself. It's more what, asset classes is it poised to disrupt, I guess. And what I'm pointing out there is basically that almost every asset, well, actually probably every asset class, it's more a question of like, to what degree is this true? Every major investable asset class has taken on some role of monetization because you can't save with money. It just doesn't work. And so these other, whether it could be a whole range of things. It could be like commodities. It could be gold. People obviously talk about gold a lot in relation to Bitcoin. It could be real estate. It could be, at the higher end, you start to get to different classes of bonds and then equities as well. All of them have monetized to some extent. And I think maybe even more importantly than that, all of them keep monetizing because that's the only way, you have to stay on the treadmill, right? Like I don't actually think we mentioned this in Bitcoin is Venice, but I have become quite fond of this analogy, or it's a bit dystopian. It's not like I don't like thinking about it, but I think it works quite well that it's like fiat just creates this treadmill for you where there shouldn't be one, right? You just have to constantly keep, whether it's, maybe even a more obvious application is just like, if you don't own any assets in the first place, you just need to keep working. Like you can't save, you need to stay on the treadmill. But I think it applies in this context too, where investors have to stay on the asset monetization treadmill because they have no choice. And the longer they do that, the more vulnerable these asset classes get to being monetized, to being engorged by Bitcoin, because they've moved further and further away from whatever notion of like fundamental. I don't. You can't quite see this fundamental value. I'm doing this because it's misused a lot because you've got to be careful with like there is no objective value, but some way of valuing
something more historically
in
normal
non-monetary terms, almost like based on your actual perception of the value of the yield that this asset will give you, or could be a bit more like in gold and then art and wine and so on. It's even a bit more involved in that, but whatever. Some notion of fundamental value is being moved further and further away from, and they're getting more and more vulnerable because their valuations are making less and less sense at the same time that Bitcoin's valuation is making more and more sense, basically. And so the closer they get, the more there starts to be a real discussion in, I don't know, like, it's not really conspiratorial, but kind of grandiose or something, but like places where significant amounts of capital are allocated. So not the kind of thing that you and I would be doing, but pension funds, right, or anybody else in that kind of position, are forced to take both more seriously. They have to take Bitcoin more seriously because just where it's got to, but they also have to take like real estate, say, less seriously because it doesn't make any sense anymore. Like it's just nonsense. I think specifically what we go into, real estate's maybe not the best example. I think equities are probably the best example. Where I think I mentioned this before. I don't know how much detail I've gone into it. I can go into a lot more now if you like, but that was my job for a long time, which I then kind of nudged towards Bitcoin, right? Was being an equity investor, where if it gets bad enough, and I would argue probably prior to like 6 months ago, I don't remember exactly when everything started going completely to shit, but you end up in this weird position where you kind of have to invest, even though it's valued incorrectly.
Yes.
Purely because you also know what the central bank is going to do to its valuation. So that it's going to keep inflating, and you have an opportunity cost, right? And also, on a maybe even a more human level, you have a fiduciary responsibility, right? You can't, because this is maybe actually is going to also sound a little bit conspiratorial, but it's just kind of like true. It's just the way the world works, that the vast majority of capital is allocated by these means. It's not allocated by me and you. It's not individuals making these decisions. It's institutions making these decisions. And so they have a fiduciary duty to basically not say, fuck it, this is all stupid. Like, none of this makes sense. They have to invest. They have no choice. Like, they'll go to jail if they don't do it.
They've got to vote for the least ugly girl, to rip off one of the anecdotes you guys had in the book. It was about the beauty contest, and you have to, not only are you voting for the girl you think is the best looking, but you're considering what other people are, going to think is the best looking girl. But in this situation, you're just trying to figure out which is the least ugly. Like, which is the least ugly wench that could win this beauty contest.
Yeah. I mean, you're
the longer that goes on, right? The more ridiculous. But like, it's almost weird in a way, because everybody knows it's ridiculous. Like, no one really believes this. they just don't have a choice other than, hopefully soon-ish, Bitcoin, right? Because the more Bitcoin monetizes on actually sensible, sound principles that, maybe we understand, but we were talking about before, probably most people don't until they've been around for a while, the more of a target these other things become. And so just to finally answer the question, that's how it's gravity, that's how it's engorging everything.
Engorging. What's your take on how Bitcoin's price has kind of maintained fairly even keeled in the last couple of weeks while equities have sold off continually? The bond market is sold off.
Quite dangerous, to be honest. Like, I gave up on not even just trying to predict, but even trying to understand Bitcoin's price a long time ago, because I think it's just I mean, you can do it from two ways, right? You can do it from like the experience of trying to predict it and be like, oh shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. I would like to think though that going from first principles is probably more like encouraging. And to be fair, like this is kind of the point of the Wittgenstein's Money first essay and now chapter 2, right? That there's not really any precedent for this. So, I mean, it's a slightly different focus. It's more aimed at like dispelling bad ways of criticizing it. I think it honestly also works like dispelling bad ways of praising it too, which is like, you really need to be more humble than to think you can know how the price is going to, like, you don't know how, you just don't, like, just stop. You have no idea. Mm-hmm. Not you, Josh. One doesn't. No,
I understand. Believe me. And I've made the decision I've made the wrong decision too many times, but I can tell you one thing. If I decide I should do one thing, if I completely do the opposite, it'll work out well for me. Generally, it's all the emotion is the hardest part, Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of wisdom about that. I mean, and also, actually, you remember before I was saying the contrast that we highlight. So you've got like experimentation versus design, evolution versus the one I've forgotten, right? One of the really important ones that we have is heuristics versus rationality. I mean, again, I get my fingers in the camera. Rationality should really be like that, like rationality as defined by Keynesian macroeconomists. But there are a lot of almost folksy heuristics in Bitcoin that speak to this perfectly, right? Like, we mentioned DCA already, sorry, in terms of my kind of introduction to all of this and how important that was. Stay humble, stack sats, like that speaks to the same thing. Like don't get wrecked. I guess you're not supposed to get wrecked, but don't get wrecked. Just stay humble. Like this is it's heuristics are important. You can't, and actually to tease that out a bit more as well. This isn't exactly something that we say in the book, but we say things along these lines, and that's why we bring up this contrast as well. That I know you weren't actually saying this, Josh, but just for the sake of argument, the idea that you can like time the market, right? And you can like evaluate trends and whatever. I don't even know what technical analysis nonsense people actually get into, but you could argue that's rational, right? Because you've like figured it out, but you haven't. Just shut up. Just stay humble.
Yeah. One thing that's a little tough, I'm sure you feel this too, Alan, is in the educational sphere in Bitcoin. First of all, right off the bat, all three of us know we have massive blind spots of our own. We're taking huge shortcuts, some of them appropriate, some of them inappropriate. But there is no doubt that certain heuristics and shortcuts are directionally correct, and not everybody can flip over every single stone. So like one example would be money printer go burr. right? When you understand the architecture of quantitative easing, you understand there's a lot more nuance and it's a lot more complicated than just the Fed sits there and rattles off a money printer. But for the average huckleberry that can't do the homework, doesn't have the time capacity to do the homework, that may be a directionally correct heuristic that will treat them well over over the decades.
It's the midwit meme, right? Or meme template.
Exactly right. I was thinking the same thing.
Which is another great heuristic, by the way. Maybe, I don't know, it's maybe a bit more involved. That, like, I don't know how you distill that into, you know, a 3-word saying or anything. But like, once you wrap your head around that, you're like, shit, you see it everywhere, and it's really wise.
Yeah,
it is.
The other thing I was going to chime in with is, it is interesting to watch short-term price action. Like, say, this snapshot of this last week seems a little different, potentially exciting, but it is so dangerous training people to think that way, because this thing is such a wild Mustang. It's like we're training Mustang trainers. Like, if you tell a Mustang trainer, hey, that horse right there seems chill, right? You're probably good. You can mount it. He'll ride around and dance around, no problem. And then they get on and get thrown off because their expectation. Then they're not set up to be able to tame the wild beast, in a sense. Like, so I think that the appropriate way to introduce people is and this is truth. We have no fucking idea what this Mustang is going to do in the short term. We know that he's majestic. We know that he's large. We know that he's engorged and likely to engorge further, but we don't know the timeline on that. And the best thing for you to do is just turn your brain off from price, because the moment hope, is interjected in the space, the thing cuts off 50% or vice versa.
I mean, another kind of obvious heuristic there is just lower your time preference. Like, it's a very fiat thing to check prices all the time.
Yeah, it is.
But actually, I do have a slightly more serious response to that. I mean, not that heuristic isn't good. It's helpful, but so this is both, what I'm about to say is both true personally, but like, I also advocate other people do this. So like, you can, take this on board if you think it's useful. That and this is true, by the way, this isn't just like rhetoric, that I never and have never told anybody to buy Bitcoin. What I've told them is that they should learn about it, and that I predict if they learn about it, they will want to buy it themselves. And I think that I don't really have exactly this in mind when I tell them that, but I think that it actually explains what you said, Dan, quite well, right? Because if you just tell them to buy it, they have no idea why they're doing that.
Yeah.
For all they know, it's like a
no conviction.
Yeah. And then they fall off the Mustang, and then they hate you and they hate Mustangs. And it's the exact opposite of what you were trying to achieve. But if you tell them to, like, I don't know if this works exactly. I might realize halfway through it doesn't, but like, it's not so much you should ride that Mustang like right now because it's awesome. It's like, you should go learn how to ride Mustangs. Yeah. And then maybe come back and try that one.
For sure. And you've gotta learn that yourself.
Yeah.
Only the strong survive. We could do a whole episode on that. So I'm going to pick out the part that I found the most compelling. Basically, without going too offensive, this piece, it is robust.
No one who would be offended is going to listen.
It is, yeah. This piece is dense.
Unless you're planning on offending me. It's like, you don't like how long it was or something.
It's dense. It's robust. It's aged well. Even in its short lifespan, it's aged insanely well. And it's basically, this could be retitled Shitcoin Destroyer, this article. We actually had no idea what we were, for a very long time, like the draft was called, I think it was Bitcoin, not crypto. We knew that was kind of lame, though. That was just like a working title. But then we were like, we generally weren't sure, like, because it wasn't, this might be hard to believe for you guys, maybe for some of the audience. We didn't really care about Bitcoiners reading this. Not that we, dismissed basically we knew they would like it, right? That kind of wasn't the point. The point was more, we wanted to write it in such a way that, to be actually like quite technically precise, that mimicked what in investment management is called a sell side initiation note. It doesn't really matter what this means in all that much detail, but it's like a very long, in-depth piece of writing, usually on a company that has
sometimes just IPO'd, like just gone public, or in some other cases, like, just has been kind of under the radar for a while. And then this bank usually is like, we need to cover this, we need to research this. And so this is our big initial, piece of research that just covers everything. Right. So it's not to say that it was that exactly, but it was written in a style that very deliberately mimicked that, so that financial professionals would understand, like, it would appeal to them. It would be like, that was our kind of trick to clickbait almost, to like get them to read it in the first place. And maybe as well, like we were quite sure about that, just given we knew like how we were going to distribute it. We were less sure, but I think this has actually gone reasonably well, but it was a lot more up in the air that we kind of hoped that people who were on the fence about crypto themselves, like probably crypto people, like not people who wouldn't have identified as Bitcoiners, would have read this and that it would have changed their mind at least a little bit.
Yeah.
That's harder to gauge because obviously most people in that position just hate me now, which is fine. Yes. But yeah, we knew Bitcoiners would like it. That was kind of not really the point.
The part that I maybe found most compelling was the everything fights for liquidity section. I'm going to read a sentence and then kind of have you fill in what this section means, why it's significant, and why it's something to look out for if you're invested in, say, a utility token. Here's the sentence that I highlighted. Why would a non-monetary token need to have a non-zero holding period and hence a non-negligible value in the first place?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Walk our audience through how the fight for liquidity is probably flashing bright orange B.
So the idea here would be to place it in kind of a more real, I suppose, context, less abstract. What we're criticizing, you mentioned the idea of a utility token before. Be a bit more precise about what that is. The idea there is it's a token of some sort, usually issued on Ethereum. Usually, remember which one is which, ERC20. But where what it's doing is that it is the right to purchase, or maybe not even purchase because it's not really money, but sort of trade for or claim or something to that effect, some or other utility, which is usually defined in kind of computational terms because it's designed as a smart contract, right? The problem, though, is that, again, more precisely what it is we're criticizing is the sale of these as sort of quasi-securities. Just another thing we can maybe get into, like what that even means, because I don't think anybody involved with this actually knows what that means, even though it's really important. But the sale of these as a way of funding whatever the business is that is then responsible for designing this and ultimately profiting from it. And you'll notice there, by the way, I'm giving the maximal benefit of the doubt. It's totally plausible that this is just a scam, but to be as kind of conservative as possible in making the argument and like not leave loopholes, I'm going to assume it is done in good faith, even though a lot of the time, probably most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, the point is to print money. So yeah, you have this what's basically kind of like a digital gift voucher almost. And so, but which also weirdly has this speculative value, right? It's not like, maybe gift voucher actually isn't the best analogy because gift voucher usually says the value it's supposed to represent is like,
Right.
$10 worth or $20 or whatever. Whereas in this case, they float and they, again, trade like securities. And that's kind of how these, the people who issue them make a lot of money off unsuspecting buyers. But the problem that they then have, which actually now I think about it, is it's really important that they're not gift vouchers because they wouldn't have this problem if they in some way were able to mandate that it was $10 worth of whatever the utility was, is that there's no reason for you to hold one of these, as in, have bought it but not yet cashed it in, other than at exactly the moment that you want to cash it in, because it doesn't, it has no optionality, I guess you would say, in exactly the way that money, like real money, does. And in fact, is the point of money in the first place.
Yeah.
So like a more technical way of putting this is that it not only does it have no saleability, right? It is not generally accepted as a medium of exchange. it is designed to not be generally accepted as a medium of exchange.
Yeah.
It's designed to be accepted as exchange for one thing. And so I think I actually don't remember if we put this in the article or not, but I think I need to credit, is it Jimmy? No, we didn't put it in the article because Big Al, who's the pseudonymous co-author, what I'm now remembering, Jimmy Song said to Big Al when Big Al was on his podcast and was talking about it, a really good analogy is casino chips, right? You only value and therefore bother to have casino chips when you're in a casino, because that's the only place that you can cash them. And actually, again, even this one isn't perfect because they have a denomination, right? It would be more like, you can imagine something like, I don't know, a casino chip, which is denominated in the equity of the casino or something. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Right. With a price that changes constantly in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, you know, you have to get your phone out and be like, oh shit, where is this trading now? I don't know.
Right.
But you're also expected to be using it in the casino for the utility of gambling, I guess. That there's no reason to expect it to have any value outside of exactly that context. But the even more dangerous thing, and that to round out what we're referencing in the quote, is that you would only want to possess it and you would only value it while you were in the casino, like as in for that period of time. It's even more disastrously designed for most of the crypto stuff that we're criticizing, because it's the fact of it all being digital means that you may as well assume you can get this instantly.
Right.
Like you don't need to like go to the casino. You don't spend time in the casino or whatever. You can get it immediately and cash it in for whatever the utility is.
Right.
And this blows up the entire economic argument of all these projects, because there's basically always going to be sellers and never going to be buyers of this. Even if, and this is the weird thing, even if people are using it, right? Like if there's, hypothetically, there could be massive demand for whatever the utility is, right? Whatever this thing gets you, but there's still no reason to expect the actual token itself to have any value. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah. I mean, no matter how big the casino gets, people very likely aren't taking casino chips home with them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's basically what you have to assume, right? For these to have non-zero value.
The other part that was interesting about that whole article was the fact that you kind of pointed out this whole financial, quote unquote, financial system of crypto is one giant circle jerk of people just speculating. Yeah. So it's speculation that's levered on top of speculation that doesn't actually ever do anything useful. Like the yield farming example, where, you know, you're basically levering and relevering these yields on top of each other, which is never lending any money to any entity in reality that's producing a yield. Like there's no rental properties here. There's no actual meaningful thing getting produced in the real world. It's just a giant circle jerk. So
the thought
those ideas together as well, like they just coalesce really well, and they're able to spell it out. You know, well, too bad a lot of people didn't read that shit 6 months ago. It would have probably saved them a lot of money.
Man, as it aged well. It's almost like what I think of from this section, and I just wrote this down while you were talking. It's almost like when we talk about what's the best monetary technology in general through history, and then for the 21st century, the most saleable good, you could say, across time and space. It's almost like it needs to do nothing, and as a result of doing nothing, do everything. Yeah. You know what I mean? By doing nothing, it does everything. But by trying to do everything, it's going to do nothing is money. And
I feel like Buddhists would say that doing nothing is everything, Dan.
That's my third article. This is going to be a series now from this discussion. But seriously, it's an example.
No, you can't have that. There's no sexual innuendo there. You need to go back to the circle jerk one. You need to work that.
Right. True.
But you kind of resonate with that.
Circle jerk doing nothing.
Yeah. Do you kind of resonate with that, though, of just it's a function of trying to do too much, and as doing too much, you're not going to compete as money. We're talking about the realm of money here, of base layer value transfer. That's the competition we're talking about.
There's a talk that we reference it, but I think we also quote it towards the end of Only the Strong Survive. So it was Ryan Gentry and Dhruv Bansal in not this Miami, but the previous one, Miami 2021. Very strongly encourage people to go watch it. And it's like 15 minutes or something, right? It's short. You probably want to watch it more than once, to be fair, because it's quite dense, but it's very, very good. But they talk about exactly this, that one of the, their topic is a bit wider. It's basically just, comparing the kind of the mechanics in some sense of Bitcoin and crypto. And they actually, now that I'm remembering it, they have kind of a similar aim. I think they say this up front, that they want to encourage people who are maybe on the fence, or maybe are siding a bit more with crypto than with Bitcoin, that actually their talents to some extent, probably in a lot of cases, are better served building on a more secure foundation. So yeah, I actually quite clearly remember being inspired by that and like wanting to work as much of that into the piece as possible. But at some point in that talk, they do make exactly this comparison, that and they track as well what the various narratives of Ethereum have been over its existence. As they,
quite a few.
I guess you could say this is a little bit to their credit, that they've realized that the previous narrative kind of combination of like didn't make sense, but like was far too broad, and that there's a more specific problem they need to solve. But this has happened like 3 or 4 times, and it's gone. I forget the different layers of it that they outlined, but it started with world computer, right? It's like, this is for everything, and they've gradually made their way towards like, shit, this kind of needs to be money. It needs to be money, doesn't it? It's ultrasound money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me to make money, it needs to be money.
Yeah,
That's what the thing that's going off in their brain.
Yep.
We could go for a lot longer, but we're going to end with probably the most important, deep question of the conversation, which
Edge
is
of my seat.
where do you stand on cast iron, Alan? This is,
okay, so like honestly,
if you answer this wrong, we're not even going to produce this. This is a big deal to us. Where do you stand?
I've known about this for like, we've been doing this for an hour and a half, so I guess 2.5 hours.
Wait, what's the most fiat answer possible? Is the most fiat answer just a non-stick pan, like not even stainless steel, just one of those cheap
can
fucking?
you explain it to me?
Yeah,
like,
I actually am pretty, and Josh will too, in that we're not necessarily cast iron maxis, but we have the biggest cast iron skillet you've ever seen at all 3 of our fire stations. It gets used pretty much every day. The debate started steel versus cast iron specifically for a steak. This is my hierarchy of fiatness of this conversation. Then I'll hand it to you guys. Cooking a filet mignon or a New York strip or a really good piece of meat on a steel pan is the most fiat thing you can do.
Oh, sure. You got to grill it.
Middle ground is grill, and then top level enlightenment is cast iron. What are your thoughts, gentlemen?
Okay. I feel like I've been
know.
rubbed on this. I thought it was just unanimous that you had to grill it. And I say this out of like almost. I'm now realizing, it's sadness. It's like I've definitely been misled because I don't even have a grill. I've aspired to one day own a grill so I can grill a steak.
So you've been, and you don't have a cast iron skillet either, or do you have a cast iron skillet?
No, I have a cast iron one.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's not just for steak. It's like.
I think it started with NVK and Saifedean. They kind of got into a tussle, and it's literally all Bitcoin Twitter's been talking about in the midst of a sovereign debt crisis. And yield
Makes total sense.
bananas.
Fine, right? Josh mentioned that before. It's done nothing.
Anything to distract from the price being 20 grand. People, doesn't matter, man. Cast irons versus steel.
Did somebody win? Like, is one of them like now out?
What they need to do is fight each other with a steel pan and an iron pan and see who wins. That's it. This is just the MMA bout all over again.
Yep.
Whoever gets cracked in the head first loses. Clean fight.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, who's on what side? I can go look
I
all this
believe
up.
NVK is cast iron and Safe is steel. Or non-cast iron skillet. I don't know.
Who do we
what
think's
are the
got the longer
arguments?
arm between the two of them? Who's going to reach
who
the
wins
other
in a
guy's head
fight
first?
between those two? I think
I've never met
Rodolfo.
NVK in real life. I don't know how big he is.
The problem is I haven't seen them both in real life, like next to each other. Like I want to know who's got the size, who's got the reach.
This is the
Back
downside
to the
of
size. Yeah.
all of us living on the internet.
Yeah.
No one actually knows what would happen if we ever met.
Bitcoin 2023 NVK Saifedean pay-per-view.
Yeah, fucking
For the
ring.
record, I'll close out by saying if I am cooking a nice piece of meat, it is on a cast iron skillet, butter, thyme, salt, pepper, garlic. That's my
I
vote.
haven't heard that. The rest of it I'm on board with. Garlic salt. What do you think?
Love it.
Yeah, it's a
Love
good
it.
option. You
So I did,
wait, Dan. Before I let you off that easy, how long before do you salt that piece of meat? You just throw salt on right before you cook it, or you let it?
I usually
Let the
pull it out.
osmosis-
We'll say I'll go 20 minutes. I'll give it 20 minutes in the air. Salt and
Ooh.
pepper go on when it comes out of the fridge. Wrong answer.
Wrong.
What's
You
your
gotta let
answer?
that thing sit at least an hour with the salt on it to let
Holy
the osmosis
shit.
draw the
There you go, I
salt
didn't know
in
that.
and get to room temperature, man.
Wow.
Oh my god.
See, this is perfect. This is how we learn, by throwing ideas out,
Yes.
making them compete, seeing which is the best.
Yeah.
We're
Josh
gonna have
is
to
a
have a
great
steak off.
cook.
Steak
Yeah.
off at the firehouse.
Yep. Alan, close us out here with a handoff to you, your work, anything you want our audience to know.
Get the book, I guess. It's free now. I mean, if you want a physical one, you get it on either, if you're in the US, the Bitcoin Magazine website. If you're not, it's a lot easier. Just get it on Amazon. But if you want a free version, I think it's my pinned tweet, I'm pretty sure. There's a free PDF. Oh, you can get it. I've like uploaded it to Z Library and all that kind of thing too. So just make sure people are aware of that. We were quite proud of that, Sasha and I. We're like the whole point. I don't know if you guys even know this, if the audience knows it, that we haven't made any money from this. Bitcoin Magazine hasn't made any money from it. So the way it's worked is that they've obviously like had a decent expense in publishing it, but as soon as they make back their publishing costs from selling physical copies, everything after that goes to the Human Rights Foundation.
Very cool.
And therefore part of that, because we don't really care, because we're not going to make money.
Wait, what if I bought it on Amazon Kindle? Does that also go to Human Rights Foundation?
I don't know. Well, I mean, you paid.
After
so
Jeff
yeah,
Bezos gets his cut.
yeah, after Bezos.
Yeah.
But if you don't want a physical one, you just get it completely for free anyway. Free. Oh, I should also just to, flog more of what's in the book. More of the subsections. Free as in freedom and as in beer. So you don't need to pay for it, and you can do whatever you want with it.
You
Very
can read
cool.
the book to know what that means. Alan, thank you. Enjoyed this.
Thank you, guys.
Lot to chew on from this one. We'll have you back on at some point in the future.
Oh, I'd love to, yeah.
Appreciate your time.
But only if you've watched Egreen Evaluata, because we got to.
Yeah, we're gonna
gotta
definitely
link
check
that.
that out. Yeah, send us a link if you get.
Oh, I will.
Yeah.
As soon as you guys tweet the episode, I'll tweet the show.
Hell yeah!
Beautiful.
All right, take care, man.
Thanks for coming.
Cool. All right. Thanks very much, guys.